Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to second day of Tashkent International Investment Forum. It's really a pleasure to have you all in the capital of Uzbekistan in Tashkent. We hope you're enjoying your time, you're enjoying the networking and chance to meet your old friends and make new friends here in the capital of Uzbekistan. Today, our session, our panel discussion will be focused on a topic of financial markets. It will be focused on topic of capital markets. How can we address the challenges in today's dynamic world, the importance of local capital markets, the role of international capital markets for prosperous economic development that needed for each country. As you know, Uzbekistan has ambitious goal to grow its economy to at least $100 billion economy in the very near future. That obviously requires substantial capital investments. It requires efficient markets. And during today's discussions, we will be addressing the problems, the opportunities that we will face, not only in Uzbekistan, but globally in ensuring prosperous growth. Today, I'm honored to be joined by a distinguished speaker with me. Allow me to introduce my colleagues. Mr. Abrorhoja Turdaliyev. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Central Bank of Uzbekistan, and he will be representing the Central Bank today in our discussions. Thank you very much for coming. I'm also honored to be joined by Ms. Susan Gabri, General Director of the Department for Private Sector Operations at the Asian Development Bank. Welcome, Susan. We're also honored to be joined by Ms. Umut Shaikh, Chairman of the Board and a member of the Board of Directors of Halyk Bank, Kazakhstan. And finally, we're joined by Mr. Dmitry Zalesky. He's the Director of the Deal Advisory with the KPMG at the CIS countries. Welcome, Dmitry. I will be addressing each of the panel members individually. I have questions for each of you, and if you permit, I will start with Mr. Abrorhoja Turdaliyev. Question for you. As a key person at the Central Bank of Uzbekistan, and we know that the Central Bank plays a very important role in financial markets of Uzbekistan, not just in the banking sector, but also in government bond market, also in currency market. Would you please share your thoughts? Would you please share your opinion on initiatives that the Central Bank is taking at the moment to grow further, to straighten further financial markets in Uzbekistan, and also maybe just to see your view, your vision on the future role of the Central Bank of Uzbekistan in strengthening and growing stronger our financial markets.
Yeah, katta rahmat savolingiz uchun. Demak, bugungi paytda kapital bozorining rivojlanishi uchun ham O'zbekistonda nihoyatda katta qadamlar qilinmoqda oxirgi yillar davomida. Shu bilan birga Markaziy bank tomonidan ham kapital bozori nihoyatda katta o'ringa egallagan. Bu hammaga ma'lum, demak, kapital bozori rivojlanganlik darajasidan kelib chiqib, pul kredit siyosatini samarali amalga oshirishda ham o'rni katta. Bugungi paytda demak banklarimiz tomonidan xabaringiz bor, oxirgi prezident qarorlaridan birida ayrim banklarimizni IPO'lari joylashtirish ko'zda tutilmoqda. Bu ya'ni o'sha banklarning bevosita korporativ boshqaruvida va ularni kelgusida faoliyatida bevosita boshqa investorlar kirib kelishiga o'rin katta ajratilmoqda. Ya'ni shu orqali u yoqqa yangi investorlar bevosita kirib, korporativ boshqaruvni shakllantirib, risk tizimini yanada bevosita mustaqil shaxslar tomonidan kirib kelishiga olib keladi. Shuning uchun ham biz Markaziy bank tomonidan bu bozorni nihoyatda rivojlanishi va xorijiy investorlar tomonidan kirib kelinishiga barcha sharoitlar yaratilishiga manfaatdor taraflardan birimiz. Bugungi kunda xabaringiz bor, demak investitsiyalar kirib kelishiga investitsiyalar va investitsiya faoliyat to'g'risidagi qonunda va valyutani tartibga solish bevosita qonunda O'zbekistonga kirib kelingan investitsiyalar va ularni olib chiqib ketish bilan bog'liq bo'lgan hech qanday cheklovlar mavjud emas. Soliqlar to'la bo'lsa bo'ldi va bu prinsipda mana shu qonun normalarining ijro etilishi o'ylaymanki kelgusida bevosita bank tizimiga xorijiy investorlar kirib kelishiga turtki bo'ladi. Biz va Markaziy bank bu o'rinda shu kapital bozorining rivojlanishi va uni mukammal har xil segment uchun o'z mahsulotlarini yetkazib berish va uni u yerda kapitalni ayirboshlanishi imkoniyat yaratadigan muhitni shakllanishi bizlar uchun ustuvor bo'lib hisoblanadi.
Rahmat sizga, Abrorxo'ja aka. Ruxsat bersangiz, keyin yana bir ikkita savolim bor edi. Mana audiensiyadan ham Markaziy bank asosiy vazifalaridan biri, keyin mana bizani valyuta exchange bo'yicha. Lekin hozir ruxsat bersangiz, mana ular bilan savol bersam, keyin sizga qaytib anaqa. Rahmat. Dear Susan, again, great to see you. Maybe I'll share a little secret with the audience. You and I have worked at EBRD some years ago, and I remember how we came to Tashkent in 2003 on a due diligence trip. You were my boss at that time, and incidentally, we're here together. Well, number one question maybe, how are your impressions of coming back to Uzbekistan after so many years? Maybe just a general view, and then I'll ask you a question on capital markets and
Thanks, Adabek. Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here. I just, as by way, my first trip to Tashkent, it was in 1993. So we've seen quite a large segment of development since then, and obviously since 2016 that's accelerated dramatically. I've had the pleasure and the opportunity of working in some 70 countries globally. So from my perspective, the developments that we see here, and I think this forum is an attestation to where things are now. We know that the financial markets are a driver of the private sector, of SMEs, where most of employment and jobs are. But what I see here right now is there's an excitement in this air. It's really a buzz. I haven't seen that actually for this time. Obviously, for many people, it's our first trips and such post-COVID, the post-pandemic. So we're excited to see everyone. But I think that here, from what we're hearing, what the Prime Minister or the President was saying yesterday, there are opportunities here. And there's a great program which has been discussed, which he laid out. And I think that there are opportunities here, but it's a matter of, the right structure, the right plan. And we're looking forward to be part of this.
Thank you, Susan. I'm sure you probably have been observing how Uzbekistan reform agenda was very aggressively promoted over the last 5 years. The changes I personally have been noticing are enormous, and obviously it is touching almost every industry. It is touching almost every person in Uzbekistan, and not just Uzbekistan and our neighbors, in a positive way, of course. But would you be kind maybe to share also, Susan, with your massive experience in development organizations like EBRD now with the Asian Development Bank, you're playing a very important role in promoting private sector focused development. What sort of tools, what kind of instruments ADB Bank or other IFIs have on their arsenal they can mobilize to help develop financial and capital markets in emerging markets?
No, thanks for that. I think that multilateral development banks such as Asian Development Bank, EBRD, and some of our other colleagues from the IFC and such are here. I think that one of the things that we can provide is that we bring both capital and know-how. Because I think we know that well-functioning capital market will support financial intermediation and such as access to finance, which we know is essential for the private sector. So our roles are to come in here and to provide that support with the tools that we have, my toolbox, as I call it, from financial instruments and our ability to support up and down the balance sheet of any company. But also the other side of the Asian Development Bank is that we have the policy reform side with our sovereign colleagues. So underneath one roof, you have this development continuum where you can actually, on the policy side, put proper policies and support the government in their initiatives as they're pursuing those, providing know-how, technical assistance to actually develop those kinds of things, as well as to create the right enabling environment for the private sector. So it's the upstream creating opportunities for the downstream. And we see, I'm hearing, from many clients here is that the opportunities that are here. So, it's a matter of putting in the right tools. We have an ability on the private sector to look at what I would call some upstream market development tools. We know that instruments such as rule of law, certainty of where your investments are going, and then we can actually then provide opportunities such as being an anchor investor, let's say in an IPO, for example. So we have a great degree of flexibility in the tools and the instruments that we use. And then we try and look at that in a bespoke basis for clients because we know that situations are different, but at the same time you have basic principles. So with that, we're trying to develop across different sectors in the financial institution space. As we know, here hearing about the cotton industry, various types of the agribusiness sector. So we do have a broad range of tools from sectors, including also infrastructure, that you can actually provide and support. We have, for example, a PPP unit, which we're looking at providing the right financial instruments and the creating the right environment for investment. So part of our role is to provide, like I said, help to create that environment. We have that ability. We have the risk-taking ability to do that, to create the opportunities and finance the private sector.
Yes, Susan, thank you very much. I also, in my role as a head of the Capital Market Development Agency, had a good experience with ADB, and I think one of the strength or elements of a bank like ADB is ability to provide policy advice with the experts that you have in the arsenal, and that is extremely beneficial for any emerging market that is facing new reform agenda otherwise. So, but I'll come back to you if you permit on that a bit later. Our next guest speaker, Ms. Amit Shaikh, and welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that Halyk Bank is one of the top banks in the CIS space and the biggest in Kazakhstan. You have seen how financial system in Kazakhstan was developing. You obviously overseen how the Halyk Bank has been developing. If you permit, I'd like to maybe ask a question. From your standpoint, from your view, can you share your experience, the advantages and disadvantages of, let's say, local markets versus international markets, and how they can complement each other from the standpoint of a bank a big bank that is important for financial system of Kazakhstan, and what tools you mobilize in your domestic financial markets to achieve those goals, and what tools you have available in international capital markets available to you.
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to answer in Russian. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me for this event, because especially yesterday I was really impressed by the level of participants, by the content of this forum. And I see today the second day how it's developing, so very interesting topics. And regarding your question, okay, I would like maybe to answer in Russian. Or maybe, okay, maybe stay with English. First of all, I would like to say about the Halyk Group. We are the biggest financial group in the region, and we are the widest present bank, again, among the countries in our region. So we are present in 6 countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Georgia. We also have a joint venture with China CITIC Group in Kazakhstan, Altyn Bank. So, and total assets of our group is around $27 billion. And from my personal experience, I've been working in different regulations in those countries, including regulation of the London Stock Exchange. Because Halyk Bank, we went for IPO in 2006 as one of the first Kazakh banks. And we and KKB, Kazkommertsbank, in those years we were listed in 2006. And so we have experience of working in local regulations, in Kazakh regulation, and also in the global regulations. In my view, your question is why it's important that the country has developed capital markets. First of all, capital markets gives the opportunity for alternative financing, alternative to banking, because the banking is very traditional, it's much more complicated. You have to work in terms of the collateral, for example, if you would like to have a lending. But capital markets, it's doesn't require all this like collateralized, maybe being analysis, but capital markets, I think, is the next level of development of financial markets, is the highest level. First of all, it requires the financial literacy, education. It requires that infrastructure is built. It's a stock exchange, central depositarium, it's very transparent rules on the issuer. And with the Halyk, we've been through like all the audit reports, building the transparency procedures within the bank. So going to the last beneficial owner of the bank and the group, working with our investors base. Today we have around 30% of GDRs, of the total shares through GDRs listed in London Stock Exchange. And we have American, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, from Asia, investors in our bank. And it's a big investment funds. We also have local market investors. It's around 2%. Those are physical individuals. And around 55,000 physical individuals are holders of Halyk Bank. And also the majority stakeholder, Almex Group. So why I think it's important to go for the development of the local capital markets, and also for then having ambition to go for the global markets, because it gives much more opportunity in terms of attracting capital, to raise the capitalization of the company, because international stock exchanges, they provide liquidity of the stocks and raising the capitalization of the company. We as a Kazakhstan, we have also our ambition to build the regional financial center, which is called Astana Financial Center. And it's been already existing for, I think, more than 5 years. But unfortunately, still, we do not have this much of liquidity and investors base in our local markets. So again, why I'm saying about international markets, it gives liquidity, raising the capitalization. So for Uzbekistan, what I see, for the development of the capital markets to be able to develop. The first is, again, very important, work on transparency. We have our subsidiary here, Tenge Bank, more than 3 years already existing. And what we see that some issues on the transparency of the company, of the corporate, when they come for lending, is still the challenge. So it should be very transparent, having audits, very important to have rating when you go for the capital markets. So all these requirements, regulations are creating more overall transparent financial system, are creating more attraction of the investors. Also very important to develop the local investors. And in Kazakhstan, we had private pension reform. We had this privatization program, which was announced in 1996, I think, or 1997, when there was a privatization of blue chip companies and establishment of the private pension funds. This initiative was very boost for the development. So we created, it was around 16 private pension funds. We had several, almost 100 issuers on the local market. So the local market, capital market, started to develop very fast. Unfortunately, after nationalization of the local pension system into one state pension fund, actually killed the private institutional investors class. Now we have only insurance companies, but they do not provide such a liquidity as pension assets. So I hope that now we have another stage of development when the initiative is to privatize or to allow private asset management companies to manage pension assets, and it maybe will provide again the new stage of development of the local capital market. So for Uzbekistan, I think it's very important to work on the infrastructure, development of the local institutional investors, work with the issuers on their transparency, audits, ratings, and other requirements. Now is very important is ESG. So we as a colleague doing a lot of work on ESG policy and ESG standards, ESG ratings. So these kind of stages are still ahead for Uzbekistan.
Well, thank you so much. I think I can tell that how much I can relate to what you have said. Obviously, for Uzbekistan, all of these points are extremely relevant. We are at the phase, in my opinion, of going through this development stage. Transparency of companies linked, obviously, to how the companies operate. We still have a gray economy, which is very substantial in Uzbekistan, and that leads to questions of auditing accounts, ensuring that they represent the right data, right information, and all of that links to things including with the pension reform and insurance industry strengthening. So, but I'll come back to you on the local investor point. I think it's an extremely important one, educating the local investors. And because if you don't have confidence in your local investors, how can you have confidence in international investors? I think that's the main question. Thank you so much. My next guest speaker, Mr. Dmitry Zalesky. Thank you very much, Dmitry, for joining us. You have very substantial and very solid experience in doing transactions, investment banking transactions, raising capital for your clients. Would you be kind, share with the audience, share with us your view, whether or not, we talked about local markets, international markets. How important for clients, for corporate customers, have a robust domestic financial market system vis-a-vis relying on international system that's already in existence? Would you be kind to share with your experience? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It was already told a bit today about the importance of establishing a proper financial market locally, and starting with the very basic premise. If you aim to grow the economy at the pace outlined yesterday, which is more than 2 times in 5-year term, you have to put some money in first. You can't extend the production unless you put the money to extend the production capacity. It's a very basic premise. And if you look at what defines the prosperity of economy, you can measure it by a very simple measure. You take the domestic credit divided by GDP. And you see that in most prosperous countries, like OECD countries, more than 30 most prosperous countries, this ratio is about 160%. If you look at Uzbekistan, this ratio is 35%. So you understand that there is at least 5% headroom for improvement in the local financial market. And if you again get back to the pace of growth of GDP, which was announced yesterday, you understand that for this growth to be prosperous for people themselves, the financial market have to grow even faster. And when you understand how fast should it be, you realize that relying only on banking system is insufficient. Trying to reach international investors would take time. And then even you have no or quite undeveloped local financial market, you're not going to succeed. I think that pretty much stresses the importance of development locally. I can also elaborate on some points about how to achieve this growth. You already mentioned that if you want to attract investors, be that local investors or international investors, apart from setting up a proper infrastructure, apart from working on policies for demand and supply, you have to, first of all, work on trust in local financial system. And this trust, it starts not in the offices of big corporations. This trust starts with ordinary individuals, which first put their money, their personal money, in local financial market. And second, the same individuals, they work for the companies which represent the investors, and they understand if they can trust by their own money to the local financial system, they understand how they can devote the money, the resource which their companies operate, to the same system. And this trust is gradually built, level by level, overall. And I also think that in environment like Uzbekistan, it is very important for the society, for the people or groups of people who determine, who are opinion leaders, I would say, to send quite strong and transparent messages. Because people look at each other, how your friends, your relatives, your colleagues invest, how do their companies invest, where they work. And if you understand that you can trust the local market, you can learn investing from these people who lead the opinions, then your personal view and attitude to this question should change as well.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. If you permit, I'd like to kind of follow up on the point of trust. I think you have raised a very important element in industries such as financial markets or financial system. When an investor is handing over his savings, or an investor handing over his funds to either a bank or to a corporation or to anybody, a venture capitalist, the number one question that will come to his mind is, how do I get my money back, right? Well, number one, hopefully he'll return his principal amount, and two, hopefully he'll earn some income. That's, I think, one of the main principles of any of the financial market ecosystem. So question of trust, in my view, I think, is extremely fundamental in developing any financial system, not only in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, but globally. And some of the successful financial markets that were able to develop over the ages, global financial centers like in London, Hong Kong, New York, I think they were able to demonstrate that the investor rights, investor protection is solid, it's unquestionable, and people know that there is a regulator that will protect them when the times go bad, for example. And as one of the advisors who were working with us at the Capital Market Development Agency from the United States, he said, the number one objective we need to achieve as we promote domestic capital markets or financial markets is you need to keep the crooks out. You need to keep the bad guys out who will fool other investors so that you can protect the integrity of the market. So with that in mind, just maybe you can follow up. What do you think it takes to increase the trust of the investor in any financial market? And this is a question maybe to any one of you. Feel free to raise your hand and contribute. But I guess fundamentally, in your view, what is required by the government, by a regulator to ensure that the trust in the system is there? Please, who wants to take it first? Yes, Susan, please.
I'll take a first stab. So thank you very much for that. I think that many of the issues that have been talked about, I think predictability, transparency, trust and accountability, those are all elements that are needed because exactly that. Are you going to, the classic example, do you leave your money in your mattress or because it's there, or do you have the trust to put it into that financial institution, whether it be a bank, your pension, that you'll be relying upon, whatever it is. So that's why accountability and standards are so important as part of this. You need to have, the rule of law, functioning of courts, and then shareholder rights. So you need this mix of elements that are needed in order to create those opportunities. And developing the local capital markets is where you want to end up to be. I mean, obviously, we know that in order to finance many of the objectives, you need international capital because the local capital markets aren't sufficient. So what do is that you help build up these different elements and support those different elements into creating this trust, which is also a demonstration effect. And accountability needs to come from the top, and you need to walk the walk and talk the talk. Because again, it really does come down to trust in this. Are you going to invest in this? Are you going to abide by the terms? Are the contracts going to be concluded? Are they going to be, functioning and that kind of stuff? So all of these elements are keys to actually not only developing your capital markets, but sustaining it and attracting it, the necessary capital into that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. She raised her hand. Please, can you see it? Please.
Trust is very important for financial markets. I think, is a key element, especially for the bank. When the depositors, they bring their money to the bank, they have to trust that they can take it out. So as an investor, you have to be also aware of the stability of the legislation. There should be a law on the defense of the minorities' rights, and the legislation should be stable. In my experience, again, personal experience, this is my third time when we invest into Uzbekistan. The first one, I was an employee of ABN AMRO Bank in 90s. I was very junior specialist there in Kazakhstan, and we were traveling here to Uzbekistan. So, and there was a big belief, and a lot of investments came into Uzbekistan. But then the trust was lost because the legislation was changed, and the capital control, currency control, and other legislations were introduced. So it's very important that the trust is there through the legislation, through the infrastructure, when the government provides this trust. We, for example, right now, being the international investor coming from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan, We already invested $150 million into the capital of our local subsidiary. So we trust today that the reforms should proceed. We're very also trustful that there are a lot of opportunities today in Uzbekistan on the development again of the financial market, capital market, trade between our countries, and overall the economical growth of the country. And also trust comes, I think, from the organization. You have to build this trust in you. For example, I say always that the trust and reputation you build by years. I don't know, 100 years you build this trust, your name. But you can lose it in 1 minute if you do something wrong, if you do some fraud. So it's very important that the internal procedures, internal regulation, and all the DNA of the organization is going through each employee, that you have to behave, you have to work honestly, and this is also builds the trust. So trust, I think, very important, the governmental role on legislation and also on the issuer, on the bank itself, how you behave with your investors or depositors.
Thank you very much. Mr. Abu Hujjar.
Qisqacha gapirib o'taman. Haqiqatan ham bir bu muhim narsa bo'ladi. Markaziy bank amaliyotidan kelib chiqib gapirsam, xabaringlar bor, biz endi bank tizimiga aholi omonatlarini jalb qilish bo'yicha ko'p ishlar olib boramizda va ular shu aholini ishonchini, bank tizimiga ishonchini yanada oshirish bo'yicha izlanishlar va mavjud bo'lgan muammolar ko'rib turib o'rganishlar o'tkazamiz. Yana bugungi paytda katta miqdorda hozir bu ham kelgusida albatta kapital bozoriga ham jalb qilinishi bevosita bo'lgan resurslar mavjud. Aholimizda naqd chet el valyutasida yostiq ostida turgan pullar nihoyatda katta. Mana demak endi mana shu muhitda banklarda yetarlicha ishonch hosil qilinmasligi oqibatida mana shu pullar haligacha saqlanib qolmoqda. Endi o'sha yerda hozir nihoyatda to'g'ri gapirildi. Bu yerda ishonch va oldingi yillardagi xato kamchiliklar oqibatida insonlarda qanaqadir stereotiplar shakllanadi va qo'rquv shakllangan. Endi bu qo'rquvni kamaytirish bo'yicha aholini moliyaviy savodxonligini oshirish bo'yicha bir qator ishlar qilinishi kerak. Shu jumladan mana kapital bozoriga investitsiya qilishga kelgusida baribir biz shunga hozir faqatgina chet el kapitalga urg'u qilinyaptiki, lekin недооцененный внутренний kapitalimiz bor. Недооцененный mana shu внутренний kapitalni jalb qilishda yanada o'sha biz anaqa qilamiz, to'ppa-to'g'ri qo'shilaman. Bunga yillar kerak bo'ladi. Ya'ni moliyaviy savodxonlikni oshirish, ijobiy misollarni shakllantirish, investitsiyalarni, ya'ni aholi keldi, aksiya sotib oldi va daromad ko'rdi. Uni daromadi deylik bank omonatlaridan yuqoriroq bo'lishi bu yanada jozibadorligini oshiradi. Shundagina ular konkurensiya qiladi. Shuning uchun o'ylaymanki, yillar davomida hozir bizda yaxshi misollar, halol investorlar, halol loyiha tashabbuskorlari, ularning shakllanishi natijasida shunaqangi halol investitsiya madaniyati shakllangan taqdirda kelgusida albatta bizda ham shu kapital bozoriga mahalliy investitsiya aholini pulni kirib kelishiga olib keladi. Va ikkinchi bosqichimiz hozirgi paytda demak ularni kirib kelishiga ham menimcha juda bir ommabop sharoitlar hali yaratilmagan. Ya'ni shunaqangi platformalar bo'lishi kerakki, o'sha professional bo'lmagan investorlarda kirib kelish qonunchilik shakllanishi kerak. Ularga xizmat ko'rsatadigan kompaniyalar shakllanishi kerak. O'sha kompaniyalarni tartibga solishda, ya'ni investorlar, ya'ni professional bo'lmagan investorlarning huquqlarini himoya qiladigan tizim mukammal rivojlangan bo'lishi kerakki, ular qo'rqmasdan, ya'ni qandaydir haqqoniy bo'lmagan yoki qandaydir bir mashinistona oqibatiga duchor bo'lmasligini oldini oladigan instrumentlar yaratilishi kerak bo'ladi. Ana o'shandan keyin bizda ham shu ichki bozorimiz shakllanadi bo'layman.
Rahmat. Hurmatli Abror aka, juda to'g'ri gaplarni aytyapsiz. Endi afsuski baribir ham tajribamiz ko'rsatyaptiki, bu umumiy moliya salohiyatini kelgan moliya bozorini oyoqqa turish uchun juda ko'p harakat, ko'p energiya butun hukumat tarafidan konsolidirованный bir harakat kerak bu uchun o'shanga qarab keyin bizani fuqarolarimiz shu bizga ishonchini oshirib siz aytganingizdek pulini jalb qilib bizani sistemamizga jalb qilishga harakat qiladi. Manimcha yana bitta ruxsat bersangiz, hozir fikrim, savolim kelyapti. Bank qonunchiligida davlat tarafidan fuqarolarimizga kafolat berilgan. Depozitlarni har bitta so'mi 100% gacha kafolati bor. Bu to'g'ri gapmi? Menimcha bu ham bir qanaqadir yordam pullarni jalb qilishga, to'g'rimi?
Yo'q, albatta bu o'sha bir asosiy hozirgi paytda kafolatlovchi narsa. Lekin bu ayrim davlatlarda bor yo'g'i 100%. Odatda o'sha omonachilarda xatari to'g'ri baholash va erta shakllantirish maqsadida 100% kafolatlanmaydi. Lekin bizada butun bir bank tizimimizga bo'lgan ishonchni yanada oshirish bo'yicha 100% kafolatlab qo'yilgan. O'sha 2008-yil krizisdan keyin shunaqa bir anaqasiga choralar ko'rildi. Bugungi paytda bu 100% kafolatlanganligi bizani o'rganishlarimiz shuni ko'rsatyaptiki, aksariyat yoki katta qismi aholini bilmaydi. Absolyutno bilmaydi. Yoki boshqacha qilib aytganda, shu 100% kafolatlangan bo'lib turib, erta bankrotli holatlarda qanaqa tartibda olinishi va bu unda muammo bo'lmasligi to'g'risida ham yo'q, lekin ularda shu oldingi yillardagi qo'rquvlar shakllangan. Bizda bank tizimimizda biror marta bankrotlik bo'lmagan bo'lsa, bizda bilgan 2016-yilgacha naqd pul bilan bog'liq bo'lgan muammolar bo'lgan va u omonatni ololmasligini, u naqd pul oqibatidaligini tushunmagan. Men omonat ololmayapman deb shakllangan stereotiplar shakllangan va shuning uchun banklarimizga nisbatan ozgina ishonch o'sha vaqtda yo'qotilgan. Mana so'nggi yillar davomida bizda hozir omonatlarimiz 35-40% ga yiliga ortib boryapti. Lekin bu yetarli emas deb o'ylaymiz. Endi hozir format boshqa masala, balki biz hozir katta reklamli kampaniya qilish rejamiz bor. U reklamli kampaniya bir yo'nalish bo'ladi. Moliyaviy savodxonlikni oshirish, maktablarga borib o'qishlar qilish, misol tushuntirish. Hozirgi paytda Markaziy bankda moliyaviy savodxonlikni oshirish markazi bor. U hududlarga chiqib asosiy segment sifatida ayollar baholanyapti, chunki byudjetni ayollar boshqaradi degan nuqtai nazardan effektivroq deyilyapti. Va o'sha ayollarga o'rgatish orqali, ya'ni jamg'arish madaniyatini, umuman olganda jamg'arish madaniyati, hisob raqam ochish jozibadorligi, hisob raqam ochish orqali в целом biznes yuritilishi, hozir o'zini ish bilan bandlik siyosati va imkoniyatlar yaratilgan bir paytda o'shalarni hammasi в целом foydasi va o'shandan bir qismini har oy shakllantirib jamg'armaga olib borish madaniyatini o'rgatilyapti. Hozir shu bor. Bir necha yillar. Xuddi shunaqa narsa demoqchiman endi kelgusida, balki endi investitsiya sohasida. Chunki bor hozir men endi tanishlar orqali juda ko'p deya olmayman, lekin bir aktivniy ishtirokchilar bor, aksiyalarni sotib olib, o'shalar orqali daromad qiladiganlar. Lekin o'shalarni misol ommaviylashishi olib keladigan, ommaviylashtirish kerak-da o'shalarni. Chunki уже bor qiziquvchilar. Bugungi kunda xorijiy shu kapital bozorlarida ishtirok etib, endi neprofessional uchastnik sifatida anaqalar orqali investitsiya qilganlar bor-da o'sha. Ular ham menimcha ma'lum bir opti shakllangan va ular ham agar muhit to'g'ri yo'naltirilsa, ular huquqlari himoya qilinsa, sharoit yaratilsa, ular bevosita xorijga investitsiya qilgandan ko'ra respublika ichida investitsiya qilishga olib keladi.
Bu xo'jaga juda nima deydi, hozir masalalarni yaxshi to'g'ri aytyapsiz. Kafolat bo'yicha, ishonch bo'yicha menga hozir ham fikr keldi. Bizani o'zimizni shu milliy investorlarning ichida va xorijiy investorlarning ichida yana bitta bir savol har doim paydo bo'ladiki, endi bunga hozir javob bermang, prosta o'zim fikrimni aytyapman. Milliy valyutani qadri. Bu da menimcha juda ham muhim masala. Ko'p investorlar har doim o'ylaydi, devalvatsiya bo'lib qolishi mumkin. Biz o'zimiz birjeniyamizni dollarda o'shaymiz, so'mda o'shaymiz. Lekin menimcha bu balki ham bir boshqacha masala. Bunga hozir ruxsat bersangiz keyin savol bir arab beraman. Dmitry, I apologize. You also did raise your hand. Can I please give an opportunity for you to add on the matter of trust? Dmitry, please.
Yeah, thank you. So just maybe a short example of how difficult and, to say, costly this trust can be gained. The example from the Russian financial market. So as you know, after the change in regulation in 2013, Ms. Elvira Nabiulina took over became the chairman. At that time, there were around 900 plus something banks operating in the Russian market. And well, compared to some other countries like United States, where you have more than 4,000 banks, it might seem less, but still, there was a feeling, of course supported by the facts, that it's not needed to have such many banks in Russian banking system, and for several reasons. One of them is that many of these banks were basically doing fraudulent transactions or like violating the banking law. Some of them were actually insolvent in reality rather than on paper. And over the last 8 years, this number from 900 decreased to nearly 300. So they are merely shutting down one bank per week. Can you imagine this? And of course, because many different parties, businessmen and people, the employees of these banks and other parts of society were involved in these activities, at first it created some negative influence, but gradually, as people started to understand that it's done to improve the trust in local banking system, so that the most stable, the most solvent banks are there, it gradually helped to build it up. And the same refers to not banking investors, not banking depositors, but individual investors in Russian stock exchange market. For the last year, almost half of operations, 50% if you take them by units, were carried out by individual investors in Russia, which is quite a big amount. And to sum this up, finally they lost, unfortunately. And to sum this up, the matter of building a trust in the financial system is, at the end, the matter of giving the trust to the government itself. Because if you don't trust the financial system, it means that you finally don't trust the government, the reforms, and the major important processes in society. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dmitry, for your comment. Indeed, the Russian example, I think, is of the classical cases of how regulator could play a very decisive and very important role in straightening the financial system, in making sure that you're able to monitor the key players and develop necessary tools for stabilization of the financial markets. I'd like to ask my colleagues in the panel, and any one of you can answer this question, but the topic which we just touched on base a little bit earlier on exchange rate. Yeah? All emerging markets, as we know, have consistent, let's say, goal or aim to ensure that the exchange rate of a given economy of local currency versus the hard currency stays stable, or at least it's predictable, so that the foreign investors have confidence in the investment, and there is some predictability to the investment opportunities. Could you perhaps maybe share from your experience, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, globally, Susan, or in Uzbekistan, what are the key elements necessary for the government, for the regulator, to ensure that the policy that relates to exchange rate is predictable, that it's stable, and you can provide that confidence both to the companies that raising capital and to investors who are investing in financial system, that there will be some predictability when it comes to their savings or the investments. Does anyone want to take a stab at that question?
Maybe I can say again from my experience. Yes, in emerging markets, it's a very high risk in terms of the currency risk, but I think every investor understands that it's a high risk, high return. And there are different risks, like political risk, economical risk, currency risk, regulation risk. So each investor, they just analyze what are the risks, what are the hedges, what is mitigating. And again, why it's important is stability of the local legislation, because you can mitigate those risks, or you can calculate at least those risks. For example, last year in Kazakhstan, we had around 25% of the international investments in capital markets into state securities, into national bank notes and the Minfin treasury bills. So the international investors, they were buying our local issued notes in tenge, but it's very short term. So it's like 30 days, for example, national bank notes, 60 days. And of course, they would just calculate how much the estimation is, if the devaluation can happen or not, and what is the return on that risk. And then they just take this risk or not. And in most of the cases, they have very good return, because the currency was more or less stable in stable years, I would say. So it's, again, the policy of the central bank. When they announce that they have, for example, inflationary targeted policy, monetary policy, then it means that they have to follow. They do not have to fix. Otherwise, they will create disbalance among the currencies, or arbitrage, for example, between tenge, ruble, dollar. So this kind of arbitrages shouldn't exist. But it again very much depends on the national banks or central banks' policies. So we, for example, as a Halyk Bank, again, our investors, they invest into GDRs in dollar terms, but all the assets, all the returns, net profit is in tenge, or we operate mostly in Kazakhstan. But if you recalculate it into dollar terms, for example, for the last year, we achieved more than $1 billion net profit, and we pay dividends in cash every year. So the dividend yield is in dollar terms from, 8% to 16%. So even if there is a devaluation, still this kind of returns you will not get in developed markets. In the banking sector, the deposit rates are negative. For example, the capital markets, yes, you can invest into capital markets, but again, they just calculate different risks and they mitigate this risk and they go into. So I would just to say that the role of the central bank and the stable role and following the rules is very important. And it's very important for us, those organizations or banks who are operating in this environment, and it's also very important for the investors.
Now, obviously, that probably links to the general economic condition of a country, the export potential, right? We know a lot of, for example, Gulf states, they have no problem with the export revenues, at least they did not until the oil price has been where they are. And if you look at the currency exchange of some of the Gulf states, they've been almost pegged to a dollar. You'd see what the rates were 10, 15 years ago, they're the same today. And one would look at it and say, what a luck. On the other hand, countries where do not have, let's say, such a massive export revenues, they'll have to be creative. They'll have to find a way to create more value-added products, compete in the global economy, ensure that the export is substantial to maintain your trade balance so that you can provide. And I think it's, as you said, it's a challenge for the central bank, and particularly in those countries where there is a trade deficit, there's a continued pressure on currency, and that implies that we need to be more creative in developing our financial system to ensure that we can capture the risks and have financial products. Anybody else wants to take that?
Qo'shimcha qilaman, hozir yuqorida professional ishtirokchilar tomonidan risklarni baholash va ular qilinayotgan choralar aytib o'tildi. Endi bizga valyuta milliy valyutaning devalvatsiyasi va milliy valyutadagi depozitlar va xorijiy valyutadagi depozitlarning jozibadorligi yuzasidan ko'rilayotgan choralarni aytib o'tmoqchiman. Endi xalqda o'sha milliy valyutada saqlamaslik uchun hammasi xorijiy valyutada saqlab o'tadi va u daromadliroq deb stereotip saqlanib qolganini saqlamoqda va o'shani yo'qotish maqsadida har oy markaziy bank demak so'mdagi depozitlarning daromadlarini valyutadagi daromadlar bilan taqqoslab farqlarni ko'rsatadi. Endi bizning finlead.uz saytida boshqa o'zimiz ijtimoiy tarmoqlardagi sahifalarimizda bu narsa ko'rsatib borilyapti. Ya'ni aholida so'mdagi omonatlar jozibadorroq va ular bir davr bo'lgan maksimum 2-3 barobar ko'proq daromad keltiradigan davr bo'lgan. Hozir endi ozgina kecha yaqinda yana ozgina milliy valyutamiz qadrsizlandi va uni daromadligi qisqardi, lekin daromadligi yuqorigacha saqlanib qolgan. Balki mana shu siyosatimizni davom ettirib boraveramiz va shu orqali baribir ertaga ortiqcha yoki isterika oqibatida vujudga keladigan talablarni yo'qotishga olib keladi. Shuni chorasini aytamiz.
To'g'ri. Rahmat. You want to? Thank you, Susan. Please.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to add one comment just to kind of feed on what you were saying. It's a risk return. International capital markets are liquid, and clients will go where they find the right balance for that. So if countries, their markets, their investments are considered riskier, you won't attract the capital. And that's why it goes back down to the original premise is that you have to have predictability, certainty of the fact that you're going to have those, you'll get your money back. So with that, and then, when you do make those investments, you have to, it depends where the sources and uses of your currency and where you're spending, your different sources, be it local currency, international currency, the ability to have swaps and swap markets, I think, to mitigate those risks as part of a developed capital market are essential tools in that, which will provide for, again, providing an attractive market for international investment.
Before turning to Uzbekistan, I have some questions I'd like to pick your brains on Uzbekistan financial markets, or how you observe it. I'd like to ask one question from, again, each of you can contribute, the role of the regulator. We talked about, and we have a representative of the regulator, we're lucky today. But in the world, there are several examples how financial market regulation can be structured. There are twin peak models, there's a single mega regulator model like in Russia. There's a model which Kazakhstan had recently followed by separating financial market regulation into a separate standalone entity. Could you share kind of your experience and your view for the phase of the early stages of the market development? What would be the most optimal model? What kind of characteristics a financial market regulator must have? What kind of powers financial market regulator must have? If we look, for example, at the Security Exchange Commission, we know how powerful that entity is. It can go after anybody, anywhere in the world, if they would notice somebody's messing around with securities, if somebody is causing a fraud in the market. And some of the biggest cases where, they've identified fraud on global corporations, locally, they would still go after them because these corporations would break securities and exchanges regulation in the United States. And that obviously gives trust to investors when they know there is such a strong regulator backing investors. Could you share your experience globally or in Kazakhstan or Russia? What sort of model do you think would be ideal, for example, for Uzbekistan? Who wants to take it? Yes, Dmitry, please.
Well, thanks. Just maybe quick first thoughts on this. So, as you mentioned, several most common models of how the regulator works. I think it's needed to be said that the key goals of market regulation are basically three ones. The first is the minimization of systemic risk in the financial system, including the banking system. The second is development of efficient financial market on its own. And the third is the protection of interests and getting trust, as we already discussed, in consumers. So if you take all the three aims and try to put on Uzbekistan reality, the first thing which you see is that what regulation is needed is very much driven by how complex is the local financial market. You need a more complex regulation for a more complex market, obviously. And it then depends on the complexity of products which are sold in financial market. It depends on how much money, how much funds are transferred by the means of financial market. If it's bigger funds, then there's a higher chance, if it fails, for a failure, right? For the failure of the entire system. So overall, I think that the regulation should gradually adapt to the changes in the market. And the more sophisticated market becomes, the more sophisticated should be the regulation. If you try to make, at the very beginning, too complex, it should not work. If you try to make less complex, it would be lagging behind the development of the market, and it would be creating additional risks and would not provide the necessary protection. So possibly the answer is we should look and understand how quickly the market overall develops, and it will bring you the answer.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. Anybody else? No? I would like to ask a question on Uzbekistan, and obviously maybe this is more relevant for you. What opportunities do you see in financial markets in Uzbekistan at the moment? What will drive the future of financial market of Uzbekistan in terms of products, in terms of services, the players, and how do you actually generally assess the current state of financial markets and capital markets in Uzbekistan, versus Kazakhstan and Russia? I'll give you one example. When we did an analysis of capital market size and its potential a year and a half ago, the ratio of capitalization of local financial markets to the GDP in Uzbekistan, I think it was less than 5%, if I'm not mistaken. We compared it to neighboring Kazakhstan and Russia, and the figures there were close to 50 or 60%. So obviously the gap is there, and obviously I understand why you were brave enough to come into Uzbekistan and make an investment. Please share your thoughts if you can.
Well, we are very positive on the opportunities which we have here. And as I said, we already made the first stage of investment, and it's not small amount. And what I see that, yes, Uzbekistan may be at the early stage of development of the banking industry as well. And then the next stage would be capital markets. First of all, privatization of the state banks should be, I think, the key. Because today, more than 80% of the banking sector in Uzbekistan is still state-owned. And as I saw, the 77% of the depositors are still legal entities. So again, if we talk about the trust especially from retail, from people, from population, it's very key that they bring money, they bring liquidity, they bring funding to the banking sector. So We expect that this stage will, and this situation will change very quickly. And yesterday, at least I heard the words of your president, Mr. Mirziyoyev, that the target is to decrease state ownership in the banking sector, and again, it will create more and more private sector, private financial sector, which I'm sure is much more usually developed and very quickly developed in different sectors in the financial markets, including capital markets. It's a digitalization, it's again the technologies, it's a new principles, procedures, products. E-commerce is very big part of the financially fintech issue development for us. We see it's a big prospect. And yesterday also the number I heard, it's just 1% of the total trade and total economies in e-commerce. So there is a huge opportunity into grow these sectors. And we, for example, being already and having experience and building in Kazakhstan marketplace. Today we are the second largest platform, building the ecosystem for our clients. I think this is the opportunity which we also can explore in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is a much bigger market than Kazakhstan, with population around 40 million people. Again, the economy is growing by 8% on a GDP growth annually. The banking sector grew by 27% during the last, on annual basis during the last 4 years, as I saw the numbers. So the growth rate here is very high. Again, it's high risk, but also very high return. And it's initial stage of development. We have experience in going through these cycles of a development, then the crisis, then again, the next stage of development, and we can bring this experience, this competence. We have already technologies, we have capital, we have liquidity, we have money. So what we have, again, experience which we can bring here. But the opportunities, I think, huge. Very important is stability of the reforms of the legislation. And there are still way to go. We expect that, again, on capital markets will be new laws introduced. It's, as I said, privatization, also the currency control, capital control, these kind of rules should be absolutely free. It's very free to enter and you can exit one day. This is for capital market investors is very important. You shouldn't wait for 1 week to exit from the market, yes? So it should be just in 1 minute. So this kind of a lot of building infrastructure is still way ahead, but the way it's going on in Uzbekistan, I'm very optimistic, and I see a lot of opportunities here. So,
well, that's a great message.
I'm very positive. And in our group, for example, today, unfortunately, in other countries, we see some economical issues, except Uzbekistan. This is point of growth within the Halyk group. We see more growth potential than in Kazakhstan today in this year. And I see that even our Tenge Bank can be the issuer, and they can go for IPO, they can attract strategic investor, and Tenge Bank can be the separate financial institution which is attracting another investors into the bank itself. And I already hear offers I have from strategic investors to enter into Tenge Bank from foreign investors. Can we go for 25%, 30%, even 49%? And it's a big companies, good names. But we think that we also have opportunity here for going like IPO on other stages through capital markets, where we can also capitalize our subsidiary. So this is our strategy.
Well, that's a great message. You know, we have investors in the room. We have investors in Tashkent. A lot of them who came to Uzbekistan, and I think you're sending a very interesting message that this is time to do business in Uzbekistan. Can I maybe ask? Susan, would you like to add?
No, thank you. Just to once again feed on, I think that it's very interesting, all the points that you're raising, because it's absolutely true. I think, you know, the Asian Development Bank from the international financial side of things were involved in supporting a number of banks within Uzbekistan, and we're looking at to deepen that. privatization of the banking sector is key in creating those opportunities. And just another comment you made, I think if this pandemic has demonstrated to us more than anything, digitization and e-commerce, fintech, all those are huge areas of opportunity where you have an ability to growth. And right now, I think Uzbekistan has an opportunity to put in the right architecture to enable all these different aspects to happen. We heard many of those issues today and this morning. And so I think that I am very optimistic here that you are poised at this time where you have a large population, education and of products is increasing, so that you have good opportunities and I think a very bright future, but you need to be consistent about how you apply your rules, the regulations and the structures that you put behind this to create that trust. And it becomes a vicious circle if you don't fulfill that. So again, lots of opportunities and one where I think you can certainly grow and develop.
Thank you, Susan.
Ana qo'shimcha qilmoqchiman, yuqori gaplarga qo'shilgan holda, ya'ni xususiylashtirishdan juda katta umid qilinmoqda. Chunki bugungi paytgacha endi demak 4 ta o'zi instrument kanallari bor bu resurslarni jalb qilish bo'yicha banklarda, demak davlat, depozit va tashqi qarzlarni jalb qilish misolcha. U kapital bozoridan jalb qilish shu paytgacha bizada yirik banklarimizda hojat yo'q edi. Chunki yo davlatdan jalb qilish oson edi unda yoki shu tashqi qarzdan, tashqi kreditorlardan pul jalb qilish juda osonroq. Kim kapital bozoriga bir instrument yaratib, uni taqdim etish va kapital bozorining umuman rivojlanishida bo'lgan ehtiyoj bizning yirik banklarimizda ehtiyoj yo'q edi. Endi bu yerga xudo xolisa mana xususiylashtirilishi va o'sha xususiylashtirilgandan keyin u banklarga strategik investorlar kiradi deb umid qilamiz. Shundan qilinayotgan asosiy g'oya va o'zi hozirgi paytda mana yirik xalqaro moliya tashkilotlari tomonidan transformatsiyaga tayyorgarlik va bankka kelgusida xususiylashtirilishga tayyorgarlik ishlari olib boryapti. O'sha natijasida ertaga strategik investor kiradi. Va strategik investor kirgandan keyin o'zini yuqorida hozir aytib o'tilgandek o'zini texnologiya, o'zini yondashuvi, o'zini strategiyasi bilan va shu orqali unga kapital bozorini mavjudligi, uni rivojlanganligi, to'yinganligi nihoyatda muhim rol o'ynaydi. Ana o'shanda ular ham ta'sir etadi degan umiddamiz va kapital bozori rivojlanishiga olib keladi.
Rahmat katta. Mitri, would you like to add anything in conclusion? Maybe the message you want to send to the audience, to the investors, to clients?
Well, maybe just a short one. What you now see is really the increasing interest in entering the capital of local companies. Right now, we are working on or talk about 3 to 5 mandates to look for targets in Uzbekistan in various subsectors of financial sector. And as you and the colleagues already mentioned, there's always a risk-reward equation which each investor solves for his own. But what could else be made better to make this choice efficient is provision of as much data and analytics and research on local market as could possibly be. And to us at KPMG, we help to make informed decisions to our clients. We think that it stands as a cornerstone of the quality of decision made. If you have the information about local market, about the risks, about the system, you are much more inclined to agree on the price with the seller. If you have less information, the gap would be huge. And on those processes which we discussed, much of the deals are not being closed because of this gap between the expectations on the price of the assets and from both sides. So let's together make this more efficient and contribute for the development of local capital market.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. I think I totally agree with you. In my role as the director of Uzbekistan Direct Investment Fund, we do this daily. We assess financial data of companies. We try to collect important information on the market positions. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges for us too, to ensure that we obtain fair information regards to our clients and the projects they're contemplating. But I think it will come with experience because, reforms started 5 years ago. A lot of companies doing big progress. It requires resources, it requires human capital, requires technical capital, financial capital to introduce everything that we've talked about, and obviously consolidation of effort on the government side. I think we're running out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but I'll be happy to give an audience an opportunity to ask a question if anybody has one. But if not, I don't see any hands. Oh, I do. Please, if there is a microphone in... Can you please raise hand? One, and is your microphone working? Yardım bir oraya iltimas. If you could please introduce yourself.
Hello. Okay. Marina Fedorova, Spectrum company, engineering company, and we are interested in construction projects actually in Uzbekistan. And my question is about the project finance as a potential instrument. Is it available in Uzbekistan for developers to come to banks and ask for project finance? And what are the rates and percentage for those projects? Thank you.
Could you address the question too?
If somebody knows, yeah.
I can answer that.
Please, Susan.
Yeah, no, thank you. Project finance is a standard instrument which is used in infrastructure, in typical infrastructure investments. And just talking a little bit about the risk and information here, if you're asking for rates and such, it really depends upon the information you have. I have daily discussions with my risk department, and of course, the quality of the information, and it depends, what it is you're doing, how, where, environmental and social and governance aspects, which are to the fore of a lot of the discussions. And then you're looking at, there's a layering of how you assess this, but project finance is a common instrument. It's clearly available or we provide it within Uzbekistan. We've done this within the renewable energy space, and so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can also add that for the project finance, we would first look for the project itself, for the business plan, again, and for the shareholders, the own capital invested, minimum 30% of the capital still should be from the founders of the project. And then we can syndicate. For example, we did one big syndication loan for Uzbekistan big corporate, and including some other foreign banks, big names. So it's possible, and we as a bank, we can provide as agency role, being here operational bank, also the financing bank, being in Kazakhstan, having capital more than $3.5 billion. So we have big limits for the borrower. But again, it very much depends on the business plan and own capital participation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there was one more question in the audience. Please go ahead if you can introduce yourself. And we cannot hear you.
Is it working?
No. İşlem yaptı.
Joanna Lillis, The Economist. Thank you all very much for a very interesting discussion, and nice to see you again at Ubek. My question is about the timetable for IPOs. Do you expect that the previously announced timetable, where
the 15 companies, including the banks, would go for IPOs by the end of 2023, or is that going to be too ambitious? And also, you've talked very helpfully and interestingly about the challenges, all of you, and of course the ambition. But I'd like to know how you think the current sort of instability on global markets because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going to affect Uzbekistan in this sense. Thank you.
I'll try to answer those questions. First one on the IPOs. I believe that's ongoing. It's planned. The companies are preparing for the IPOs. Yes, they're ambitious, like every other reform that is being conducted in Uzbekistan. We need to have ambitious goals, I believe, to achieve success. Everything, I think, will depend on the condition of the global markets. It will depend on the success of domestic reforms, including in the financial market, in the capital markets. But you probably know, even Margaret Thatcher, in her early years of the privatization of British companies, she also came with very ambitious goals, and the success of London as a capital for financial markets came through privatization of biggest state-owned companies in Britain, like I think British Telecom, British Gas, and they were done through what they call them national IPOs, public IPOs. And the ambition is obviously similar here, we would hope. And I would be interested to invest in best Uzbek blue chips, best Uzbek national companies, and they should be widely owned, of course. With regards to second question, it is, it's a sensitive one. Obviously, I think it is impacting not just the region, it's impacting globally, but we'll hope for the best and the soonest resolution of the situation. Anybody else? If not, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude. Allow me to thank, first of all, the dear panelists for spending their time and sharing your experience. Really an honor to be here with you. And also thank you to our guests who came in this morning. I hope it was useful to hear our panelists and experience. And obviously, Uzbekistan financial capital markets, I personally believe, has a great potential. The country is in the early stages of its market development. Our GDP per capita is relatively low compared to other countries. And I can only imagine what sort of opportunities there will be available for investors in different asset classes, in different products, so that we can together help to develop the economy and achieve the goals outlined by our president yesterday in making sure that Uzbek economy is prosperous and it benefits our people. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your rest of the day.
Thank you.